Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
It's Ron Crabtree here, back as your host of MetaPod, where we continue this discussion around the three common challenges that organizations that are involved with tangible goods, the forever labor shortage, digital transformation, digitization of work, needing to do more with less. And something that I kind of came up with a term, I'll call it the tariff catastrophe. And it's this looming, what's going to happen now with the Trump administration and all of the tariffs and changes there. Are there going to be retaliatory tariffs? And it's going to drive a lot of changes and impact the landscape of supply chain in particular. I think about who's impacted by that. Well, first and foremost, it's going to be procurement and supply chain, network design. Where are we getting this stuff? And then it's going to flow out to the rest of the organization. Do we have to start thinking about redesigning products? How's it going to impact our pricing to our customers? And it just goes on and on. But there's clearly a big load right off the bat that's going to crush supply chain folks in particular. And I'm really pleased to have Jeoff Burris joining us here for this podcast. And I've known Jeff for over 15 years now. We've worked very closely together. And it's kind of on my speed dial when I think about procurement expertise and, how do you deal with some of these challenges? So this podcast is really for you if you're like, okay, what would be those key things that we should be evaluating from a supply perspective? And then how can we determine the scope of that issue and the challenge and the opportunity? And then pivot to, okay, so what do we do about that? So with that, Jeff, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate you taking the time to have me on your podcast. I'm Jeoff Burris. I'm the founder and principal of Advanced Purchasing Dynamics. Like most people, I guess, at least in my age, I didn't grow up wanting to be in purchasing. I wanted to grow up and be in production and started off as a production supervisor. Got caught in the Reagan-Carter recession, whoever you want to blame that one on, and got my master's degree. And it was the folks at Ford Motor Company that brought me into purchasing under the view that they needed to change their supply base. And I think it's topical to talk a little bit about that in terms of background, because it's what we're involved in today. It's a radical change of the supply base. But at the time, Ford, GM, and Chrysler were getting their clocks cleaned by the Japanese on quality, and they diagnosed the issue as we have too many suppliers. They were buying on price. They wanted to drastically shrink the size of their supply base so they could work more collaboratively with fewer suppliers to attack cost. And that's what drew me into the industry. And I worked for Ford under those kind of premises for a number of years. Then left and went to work for an automotive supplier, both in purchasing and running a P&L division. And almost 21 years ago, about this time, I started thinking about what I wanted to do with the end of my career. And I thought, why not set up a business around what drew me into purchasing to begin with? That's understanding cost and collaborating with suppliers. And that's what we've been doing at APD for the last 20 years with consulting, training, and also technology. So not too much of a commercial, but that's a little bit of the background.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Jeff. So when we talk about all the things we could be concerned about when it comes to the impact of what I'm calling the tariff catastrophe impacting North America in particular, what would be the kind of like the top three things that any organization that's either in manufacturing or consumes a lot of goods that's part of your cost stream, what should you really be thinking about and diagnosing and evaluating for the scope of the opportunity or threat?
It is a threat. It's a threat. It's with all good threats, I guess, come some opportunities as well. I guess the good news is we've been here before, and we were a little prepared for tariffs the first time around. When I think about supply chain and supply chain strategy, CEOs and we were talking to back before COVID, and back before the first tariffs, we're talking about making where they sell and buying where they make, drastically changing the supply chain. So there's already kind of a movement before the first round of tariffs hit, and the first round of tariffs threw some gasoline on that. And COVID threw some more gasoline on that because it exposed the weak links in these global supply chains. So I think that the industries as a whole have been on a move towards more localization of supply chains and shutting supply chains down, but the job isn't finished. And so the tariffs present a number of risks. There's financial risk. Who's going to bear the brunt of them? Can you pass them along to customers? There's the legal risk. Even though the supplier may be the importer of record, are you obligated to pay? Are your customers obligated to pay if you pass them along? There's the risk of supply chains, the stress that it's going to cause on supply chains. Right? I've been involved in a number of situations where supply bases were transforming. Maybe companies were running away from a supplier who had financial difficulty. And there was always a rule said, don't be the last man standing, right? In a troubled supplier. So while you may have you may be deciding, hey, we're going to stick with this supplier even though we're impacting a tariff, the other customers may not, right? So it presents risk there of being the last person standing with the supplier. And the other thing it presents is the risk of well, we used to call it Ford Motor Company, I guess, loving suppliers to death, right? When we start to localize, who else is localizing at the supplier? Are we feeding them too much too fast and therefore increasing the risk even though we're shortening the supply chain? So there's that risk. And Ron, I always want to add a little bit more value. So instead of three, financial, legal, and then risk, I added a fourth, and that's the opportunity cost. What we did see in the first round of tariffs compounded with COVID was the opportunity cost of purchasing, not doing the strategic things that were already on their plate. You get focused in on tariffs, you get focused in on supply chain, on COVID issues, and you're not doing the strategic things that you were doing in terms of cost, quality, and delivery, the strategies around those. And that was a huge opportunity cost that was lost. And when we came out of COVID and people started, getting their heads above water again, I think a lot of CPOs we were talking about said, yeah, I have a long list of things that we just frankly stopped doing that we shouldn't have. So I put that in the opportunity cost.
All right. Well, let's go back and look at each of those for a moment. Well, what I'd like to hear now would be, let's pretend I'm on the board of directors. I don't know a whole lot about supply chain and these kinds of challenges. I want to walk down the hall to talk to my purchasing folks. What am I looking for? How do I gauge the degree of threat or opportunity with each of these? Tell me a little bit of what's the data? What's the information? What are the questions we should be asking? What are we hunting for to determine how big or not the challenge is?
Well, since you're on my board, my first philosophy is always you got to dive into the detail, but you never want to confuse a board member. You never want to confuse your boss. So you got to dive into a very complex issue and present it very simply without being condescending, right? So we always view it as peeling the onion, right? Showing the executive what's on the outside, what the impacts are going to be at a very high level, and then drilling down in the detail to a level that you think is sufficient, but always having some detail at arrears, because a good executive prides themselves on questioning beyond what's being presented. So think in advance. Don't show all your cards at once. Keep a little detail behind and be able to show. The first area I'd suggest diving into that detail is on the spend analytics side, right? Not only where are you buying, but where are your suppliers buying? Where are your sub-suppliers buying? I was talking to a CPO just yesterday, who has got the same kind of background as me. I first was involved with machining of castings, right? Where understanding down to dirt is pretty easy, right? Where did the die caster buy his ingot from? Where did that aluminum come from? You're going down three tiers. Then the CPO I was talking to yesterday buys very complex assemblies, and their company builds very complex assemblies that include 1,500 to 2,000 components. Some of these components are assemblies in themselves with 100 or so components on it. So for him, the task of driving down to dirt to try to understand the potential tariff impact is a huge amount of work. When I ask him, how far do you think you are in this work? He goes, well, I know where I buy from. I know where most of my suppliers buy from, but I don't know where their suppliers and their suppliers buy from. So he's looking at this as, I don't know where my issues are going to come from, but I know if tariffs start impacting us, they're going to start doing. So you've got to be able to as much as possible, start putting that spend analytics together. You want to be able to look at the analytics by region, by harmonized codes and Incoterms that are there.
Whoa. Can you define Incoterms? That's an acronym most are probably not familiar with.
Oh, who's the importer of record, right? The shipment terms. Are you buying X works from the supplier's facility in China? Therefore, you're responsible for the import. Or is the supplier themselves the importer of record, and maybe they're shipping direct to your facility, or maybe they're shipping to a warehouse and you're buying from a warehouse? Thanks for stopping me, Ron. Appreciate that.
Yeah, because answering that question is crucial to understand the degree of risk that the organization is taking on directly and then indirectly with your supplier or direct suppliers, and then in turn their suppliers, because if things get messed up 2 or 3 layers back in the supply chain, it's going to mess up everything for you, even though you don't have direct control over it. But you need to understand the degree of risk that you're facing there. That's what I'm hunting for. If I'm the executive, I want to show me that you've got the data and can answer those questions for me.
Absolutely. The big item there is, if you're buying and you're the importer of record from China, you're responsible. Right? If the Chinese supplier is supplying to you from a warehouse in the U.S. is the importer of record, don't assume that you're not going to be responsible for the tariffs. You then got to go into the contracts and the terms and conditions. Maybe if you're buying if the supplier has written the contract that you're buying off of, or they put a provision in that says they get to adjust for tariffs. And you got to go through those documents and look for that kind of stuff, kind of like an Easter egg hunt, to understand exactly what your risk is.
Awesome. Thank you.
The last on spend analytics that I think is important, and sometimes as purchasers, we think our job ends when our product hits the manufacturing facility. But no, our responsibility extends to the customer. And you want to be able to do your spend analytics by customer, because then you've got to look at what's the customer's obligation to take tariffs, right? Maybe you've got contracts with customers that allow you to raise your prices. Maybe you're a consumer products company, right, that gets to determine what your sale price is, right? But you need to look at those and be able to pass them through. Over the course of 20 years, we've done a number of due diligence on the acquisitions. I think one of the last ones we did in Competitve, actually, we were looking at the contracts for the steel components that the target company was buying. And when we're looking through all the documentation, we knew where steel prices had been and where they were going. There was a substantial number of steel price increases on the table in the purchasing group. And the first question we asked was, show us your customer contracts. When we started looking at the customer contracts, surprise, surprise, you weren't able to pass those increases along to the customer, right? So understanding your spend and where your spend is going and what those contracts look like, I think sometimes we forget to do that as purchasing leaders, and I think it's fundamental to providing value to the company.
Awesome. All right, what's the next area we should be doing a deep dive into and looking for details and evidence and answers to questions?
The next area it was the legal and the contracts. Don't assume you know what you know. Well, when we've gotten involved with companies, and I think mostly we live in a complicated world, right? We try to impose our standard terms and conditions on suppliers. Suppliers try to fight our standard terms and conditions. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not successful. Many companies still have contracts that are kind of spread all over. It's hard to understand exactly how many are out there and what the terms of all these contracts are. Um, we- we've got a client who's doing a very good job in terms of benchmarking that and preparing for that, because for the last 10, 12 months, they have been going out, looking through all the contracts, putting summaries of the contracts together so that they understand exactly where they are with each one of their suppliers on critical terms. And the ability to pass along tariffs is certainly one of them.
Awesome.
Yep. The other thing, if you don't already have, right, one is looking at the contracts, two is engaging your legal counsel before you have an issue. What's their view of the issue? What's going to be impacted? If you've got inside or outside legal counsel, chances are they've been involved, or they should have been involved in every contract that you've signed. Right? Start picking their brains early and fostering that communication. What are they doing to keep it involved? And then the last one, don't only look at your component suppliers, look also at your transportation suppliers and logistics suppliers who are involved. If you're using an outside firm for customs compliance, start getting face to face with them, right? Might be a little late. I think the tariffs are threatened for February 1st. Some of them. We'll see if that happens.
Okay. That makes sense. And kind of making me think about, the emergence of, using AI and other tools to do sourcing. We think about, orchestral software, for example, and having this engine to do the sourcing. Well, it just occurs to me that there's probably layers of questions and I'll call it contractual obligations that have to flow down whenever you're doing that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, I think especially on the indirect side, um, it's one is the number of SKUs that you have that you're buying and the sources of those SKUs. Even though you may have a consolidator, you might be going through a Granger, and if you're going through, what do your contracts say about that? And chances are you've got some real risk there. The final area we talked about in terms of preparedness, and I think it hits on the themes you were talking about earlier. Preparedness, right? Look through your processes, your staffing, and your skill sets based upon what's going to be coming at you. How do you identify, assess, and approve new suppliers? How long does it take? How much are the customers involved in that? How much are the operations and sales involved in that? How do you resource? What approvals are required? What engineering and operations are required? Um, Best companies have a gated launch approval process where when purchasing wants to resource, you got to get all the players around the table and say, we're going from supplier A to supplier B, and here's how we're doing it. Operations, what do you think? Sales, what do you think? Engineering, what do you think? And get everybody signed off on what you're going to resource and how you're going to approve that new supplier through the process. Give sales the task of talking with the customers and saying, what are the customers doing for expedited approval process if the customers get to be involved? Everybody's got a long, robust process that takes out risk until the risk is too great. The example, not too many years ago, but long enough, there was a company that had a major supplier um, that had a huge issue, went to the OE on things that normally take a year to a year and a half to resource because of the testing and validation. And approval was given to resource and then catch up on the testing and validation. right? Is that a huge risk for the customer to take on, the OE to take on? Yes, it is, but it's either that or don't build vehicles.
There you go.
Right? And at the end of the day, a robust process was put in place, but it was do and then test rather than test and then do. And what we found in the first round of tariffs was that customers were changing their processes. When purchasing and sales went together to the customer, explain the situation, explain the risk, right? Customers did the right thing.
Yeah, this is great because you just got going right into, we've asked the questions and uncovered, yes, in fact, we've got challenges here and potential risks, and you're just naturally rolling into. So what do you do, right? So that was perfect, spot on. So the go do is reach out, engage, and share information. So it requires, a lot of transparency, upward to customers, and then a lot of transparency from you upstream with your suppliers, particularly around the legal issues, the cost ramifications, and if we're going to make changes, what are the impacts of those changes over a long period of time? Is it going to impact our product development cycle, our speed to market cycle? If you're in an organization that has lots of innovation going on, your engineers are continually developing new products, new product development groups, they've got to be carefully integrated with procurement, supply chain, and ultimately with customers so that we're not getting boxed in on a design that means we're going to have a real issue from a cost perspective, a competitiveness perspective, because we're kind of designing in things that'll have heavy tariffs versus figuring out how to design in things that are easier to avoid tariffs altogether or lend themselves to nearshoring or even, onshoring, if you will, the supply of those things. So just those are what's coming to me. I mean, what else would you add to that?
I think the most important one I saved for last, and that's the people aspect of it. We talked about the processes. We want to look at the processes, how the process is going to be changed, what the impact is going to be. But then the question is the people. Do you have the right resources with the right skills in the right regions? Right? You may have the right people, but if suddenly you're changing your sourcing patterns from sourcing a lot in China and Southeast Asia to sourcing a lot in the US, right?
That's
Change.
a massive change.
A massive change, and you don't have enough supplier development engineers in the US. You don't have enough buyers in the US. You've got buyers in China, you've got buyers in Southeast Asia. So start doing that resource mapping now and start identifying the whole, right? The the political analogy that I always think of is never let a good crisis go to waste, right?
I like
It,
that.
the issue that some companies are finding is that business was slowing down anyway, right? When we talked to folks, there was a contraction pre-election that people were kind of tightening their belts anyway. And in some industries, that's opened up a little bit. In automotive and heavy manufacturing, not so much yet. And so companies' revenues could be down. It could be facing headcount cuts, right? At a time when the number of suppliers purchasing is going to be dealing with is going to be going up, not down. The number of parts being resourced are going to be going up, not down, right? Start putting the numbers together on that. Make sure that you're aware of what the impacts are going to be and don't respond to a CEO who says we need a 10% head count with I can't do that, right? Instead, approach the CEO with data. Here, if you're my CEO, Ron, here, Ron, I wanted to come in. I understand we need to do a head count reduction. I want to talk about what we're doing, what we have coming in front of us, and frankly, what we might need to take off the table, right? Well, I remember back my early days when I still had some hair on my head. Um, we were in a senior staff meeting. I was executive in the company, and the CEO announced the 10% headcount. the vice president of engineering made the fatal mistake of saying, I can't do that in the meeting where the CEO was making the announcement.
Okay, political suicide.
He ended up taking out 10%, right? Um, I'd like to say I was smart enough to think of it on my own, but just always remember, if you're a purchasing executive, talk to the sales guy, because salesmen know how to sell. They know how to sell not only to customers, but also to the CEO.
Exactly.
What's his approach going to be, and mirror his approach? And that's what I did in this situation. As I went and I connoitered with my friend who was the head of sales and marketing. He says, here's what I do, Jeff. I put the list together of everything we're doing. I put the list, I go in and have a conversation on what we're doing, how we're doing it, what needs to change in order to meet it. I followed his approach, and instead of walking out with a reduction, I actually got to increase my head count while others were decreasing theirs. Right. So that's the approach. Don't say no. Address the issue, address the resource, but also do it from a fact-based approach rather than a whining and crying approach.
Yeah, so let me summarize that with if this is what I would advocate is, I'm guessing you've got tools and you can confirm or deny here in a moment, but in lean manufacturing, there's this technique called the versatility diagram, and it's basically capturing for a given function what are all the different sorts of skills people need to have, and that's kind of a current state. And down the other side, we have who are the roles or the individuals in the organization, and we map that out, right? So here's the skills, who needs to have them and at what level, and basically kind of get a current state. And then to your point, you say, okay, 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, as we move to that future state, what they need to do is going to change because we're changing up what we need them to do, what skills are required. So we don't even have those skills necessarily. And the amount of work that needs to be done can actually be mapped then, saying we're going to increase the I'll call it the purchasing activity by 25%. Exactly which skills are impacted, exactly which people, and how does that going to impact the need for the staffing? And I think you have to have that degree of a picture to show the CEO, I think. Do you have an assessment tool or a method you use to help people figure that stuff out?
Yeah, well, we do what we call a competitive advantage assessment, where we'll look at all processes used within purchasing, and a subset of that competitive advantage assessment is a buyer skill and knowledge. And I'm a production person to begin with, and it's kind of ingrained in me. I always start with the processes, understand the process, optimize the process, and then look at the skills after the process is refined. I'm going from point A to point B. I can point a positive future uh, to the CEO. Here's how we manage through this transition, uh, getting smarter. Um, and as I'm sitting here, things pop in my head that I just feel the need to talk about. Understand also where your competitors are, right? Who
Bingo.
are your company's competitors, and are you ahead of them in this fight? Um, because the analogy of three men running from a bear who's chasing them, trying to eat them, and one says, "I'm worried we can't outrun the bear," and the other one of his buddies look at him and said, "I'm only concerned about outrunning you." And that's life, right? The industry that we operate in, what we achieve is the bear. We're always running from the bear with our competitors, and we want to be able to outrun them.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We're actually working on around this forever labor shortage phenomenon. We're actually working on a benchmarking survey that we're hoping to get rolled out here in the next couple, 3 months. What are all the things you could or should be doing to get in front of the forever labor shortage? And the microcosm of that is a shortage of procurement and purchasing people to do this future state, right? So what are all of our options? There's like 70 different things, and we're working through a benchmarking survey, and that'll be a fun thing to see is, as a way for organizations to benchmark, what am I doing? what are my competitors doing? Or what are other industries doing at what level? And can I learn from that and, innovate and make changes to the organization more quickly to cope with the fact we're going to be, the problem with labor and having people to do the work is going to get worse. It's not going to get better. So we have to get really smart about workforce development planning and all that good stuff. And the microcosm that you were addressing here is within the procurement organization, supply management organization, you got the same challenge. Where are we at today? Where do we need to be in terms of the number of people we're going to need to run the business? And then what are the skills? And you've done a nice job of kind of framing that up. I don't know if you want to add anything to that thought.
No, I would. And what add to it, I think getting resources are going to be an issue on the manufacturing floor. From our white collar world, it's also going to be an issue. First and foremost, the CEOs are all talking about AI, right? So when you're talking about headcount, you need to be able to address how you're leveraging AI and machine learning to get people out of non-value added tasks in the supply chain, right? I love the quote. I wish I had to come up with it, that you won't be replaced by AI. You'll be replaced by someone leveraging AI, someone you
Love that. I love that.
I know personally, I've been using AI for a year and a half, 2 years now when we have it at APD. And many of the mundane tasks that we do, research, for example, I think of Chat 4.0 as Google on steroids. I can ask it to research a topic, give me ideas about the topic, but I never ask it for a finished product. If I'm trying to develop a product, whether it's a webinar or a blog or something, my final test is, does it sound like Jeff wrote it? Right? Is it something I would have written on my own? It's just better because AI pointed out a couple areas I should look. And in many cases, when I ask AI for 4 or 5 points, it'll give me 2 or 3 that I didn't think of, and I'll discard a couple, right? Because I don't think they're valid, but maybe AI points out something that I should have thought of and didn't.
Have you tried this one, Jeff, where you ask AI, what should I be considering in negotiating my next real estate lease? Have you done that sort of thing using AI in terms of what to think about in a negotiation even?
Absolutely, right. We train negotiations. We train the tactical aspects of setting up a negotiation. We train the behavioral aspects of how to foster better communications. And I'd use AI to the point of saying, "Hey, here's the issue I've got that I'm going to be negotiating. Here's the approach to negotiations I like to use." And we're big fans of Yuri getting to yes, right? Put in the prompt. We're using Yuri getting to yes approach. The person I'm going to be negotiating with is a CEO who, from a disc standpoint, is a high D, high C. How do I frame the issue? How, and it will give you suggestions. Again, it's not a cookbook to follow, right? I view AI in those situations as a peer. It's like calling Ron Crabtree up and say, "Ron, I got an issue. I need to go. What's your thoughts about it?" And after we have a conversation, you may give me 3 great ideas and 2 bad ones, right? Thanks for the ideas, Ron. I really appreciate it because I ended up with 3 great ideas, right? I don't talk about the 2 bad ones you gave me. And I treat AI as kind of a Ron Crabtree, right? Someone I can bounce some things off and get some ideas.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you've offered up a couple of bits of wisdom here I hadn't really thought of before that are really important. If you're in the supply management profession, becoming really good friends with your sales force, right? The people that are selling your products, pretty darn important because, they've got perspectives you don't, and they probably have a much better ability to help you connect what you need to do in supply management to cope with these challenges like the tariff catastrophe that I've coined. They're going to help you think that through. And then how are we going to sell that? Because we may have, not only do we need to sell it to our CEO, we probably have to go sell it to our customers as well. And I think that's a gem. That's a real gem.
What the CEO doesn't want to see is a purchasing leader who says, I want to do this, but I can't because sales won't let me. Well, have you had a conversation? Are you guys involved in conversations on an ongoing basis? And I've had the benefit of working for good people and bad people, I guess, right? And the good ones are ones who found a way to foster that kind of cross-functional communication so that, if I've got go back to engineering, if I know I'm going to be doing a lot of resourcing, I need to go talk to the engineering and saying, how is this impact first? How is this impacting you? Right? What can I do to help? What are you trying to achieve? Before I start saying, here's what I need to achieve and here's what you need to do to support me. First rule of negotiations is shut up and listen, right? If you're negotiating with engineering for resources, first ask the conversation, shut up and listen, ask them about their current situation, what they're trying to achieve, how you can help them achieve their goals, then start laying the table for what you need to achieve. And at the end of the day, if engineering needs more resources, say, let me set up a meeting with the CEO. Let's go in and talk to him about your budget and the fact that you need resources, and I need you to have more resources. Right?
Awesome. Well, this has been fantastic. You've given me a couple of things I hadn't really thought of quite that way, and you never failed to amaze me with some of your insights. Any other bits of wisdom, advice, recommendations of what to do as you face this tariff catastrophe situation?
Just face it head on with a positive attitude. At the end of the day, one of my favorite books when I was executive that we were told to read, it's called The Lessons of Experience. And basically the framework is that there are a handful of things, 5 to 10 things, and they're crises, they're opportunities that shape your career. Face this as one of those, right? Rather than a pain, think of it in terms of an obstacle to be overcome, kind of amount efforts to do, and something you'll look back on 10 years from now, like we look back on COVID and we managed through COVID, and people have a lot of good stories about how they managed through COVID, the benefits they brought to the company. It's the same story here, right? This risk presents a lot of opportunity for us as well.
This has been great. So, Jeff, you put a lot of really good stuff out there and things that really need to be explored. If folks want to get in touch with you to, pick your brain or ask for, how they might solve certain kinds of problems, how do they get in touch with you?
Burris at apurchasingd.com is my email address. The other thing, go to if you're interested in this topic or other topics, go to our website, apurchasingd.com. We have topic hubs, and we have a topic hub on U.S. policy changes. I am constantly using Google News and looking at what's happening with tariffs, what's happening with U.S. policy in general. And one of the things I think we need to do, and I didn't talk about today, is make sure you're educated on tariffs. Make sure you're educated on how they're implemented, why they're implemented. You as a purchasing leader, you're bearing the brunt of this, right? So you should understand it more than others do within the company. So I'm kind of do a deep dive there. The topics hub that we have is a good way to do that.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for joining me.
All right. Appreciate it, Ron. Bye-bye.
Terry.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.